Welcome back, everyone, to the one and only developer podcast that you need in your life besides the other developer podcast that you need in your life. This is Merch Conflict. I'm James Montemagno, and with me is my good friend,
Frank Kruger. I'm going to try not to blow out your sound system just like James did. I apologize on James' behalf for all your ears. Hi, everyone. We are a development podcast. I think the best development podcast because we talk about fun, interesting things.
Sometimes, one time, what kind of things? Like going to the beach, camping on the beach?
4.0 has fine tuning. We could talk about that for a half hour.
Whoa. Did you watch .NET Conf focus on AI today? 8 hours of AI.NET goodness?
No, I missed that. I did see someone complaining that the ML.NET domain costs like $200,000 or something. Who is complaining about that?
I think it was Maddie. I think it was Maddie. I think she pinged me, and I was like, I'm pretty sure the MLNet team has known about this. Beth has known about this for the entire length of it. So
yeah, I just thought it was funny. Yeah, even Microsoft has limits. Like, no, you do not pay $200,000 for a domain, no matter how cute it is.
I mean, a 2-letter domain. Granted, it is .net, but still.
Still tempting. I mean, what do they make, like $9 trillion a quarter? I think they can do it.
I don't know if .net does, but I don't know if it's 9 trillion. I don't
Shave
know.
A little off the top.
I think if it was 9 trillion, our market cap would be more than 3 trillion. So.
Yeah, I'm probably off by a few orders of magnitude.
Yes. Well, you did miss out on some good stuff, so definitely check it out. Actually, there's a few interesting real-world case studies, like how H&R Block is using .NET and AI together for like internal tooling and a bunch of stuff. That's kind of cool. Like, it's cool to see real-world stuff. I had a good conversation. Let's talk a little bit about AI really quick. I had a good conversation, and I'm really into the business evolution side of AI. The consumer stuff, I don't think I care that much. Okay,
gosh, everyone's doing business.
But I thought of it like this, because Maria, in the keynote for the .NET Conf AI, which is on the .NET YouTube, had this cool demo that I got to see them put together. I think maybe Sander, a few other people have demo. I'm not sure if anyone's demoed it. I saw internal demos of it. But basically, it's like this. You know how like you have a problem at a store or with an electronic?
I have problems all the time. Can you be a little more specific?
Maybe you have a bank and you have an issue, and you call in, or you open a ticket and you call in and you talk to somebody. You got to call them back later. So
I stop right there. I stop the moment it's not a button on the website that says I'm in trouble. You click that, and then the next option is call me instantly with help.
That's never happened.
Otherwise, I'm out.
Okay, so imagine your scenario where you're going back and forth with customer service, HR, whatever, and they have a history behind you, right? There's a history graph of the things that you're talking about, XYZ. Now you call back again, and you talk to the person on the phone, and they're like, "Hey, hold on, give me a few minutes to look and read through this documentation." You have to read in, you wait for 10 minutes. You've already been on hold for 2 hours. Now imagine that instead of them reading 18-page document trying to get caught up, there was just an AI summary that they could ask all this stuff about the data. How cool would that be? How cool would it also be if, imagining you just called in or you talked to a bot that was like way smarter at making decisions because it knew about your data and could answer things. So I think in like that aspect of it, I was like, oh, this is a great use case, because one, if you can improve the bot chart to make it so it can resolve my issues by a 10x improvement, so I don't have to talk to people, that sounds great. But then also, if you make my experience talking to people that much better, that seems like a win-win. I'm just saying.
Okay, I agree with you, but I have to make a joke. When you go get a rental car, for some reason, they have to type for a half hour, whatever. They're typing some thesis or something. I don't know what they're typing. But now I'm just going to be imagining that they're like talking to ChatGPT and they're just looking for like chocolate chip cookie recipes. You've ruined it, James. I'm just assuming they're talking to an AI, getting my full history. Like, yeah, he's not a very good driver. It was dinged up twice. And you should add more butter to your chocolate chip cookies.
Yes. Accurate. All right, let's talk about bindings. Okay, so let's switch it up. We haven't gone back. We've talked about a lot of things. We've talked a little bit about the .NET 9 recently with .NET MAUI and the latest previews. I recently put out a video. I don't know if it's out yet, but I recently was doing a session with Rachel Kang, who's a PM on the .NET MAUI team. Was an engineer, became PM. That's pretty cool. On the .NET MAUI team. And she was talking... That's her right there. If you're on YouTube, you can see that's Rachel.
I'm pointing to a single pixel of a person.
Frank just like pulled out like a 8,000 page document that he printed off. Apparently, I got a printer, so it's okay. It's printers. Sometimes you got to print stuff out. I get it. Paper. It's there. So I was doing a session with Rachel, and a cool brand new piece of technology that the .NET MAUI engineering team put out is something called Native Library Interop, aka the next generation of bindings, aka Slim bindings, aka Native Library Interop, aka it's out now, you can try it today, aka a way of taking a native library written in Java, Objective-C, Swift, blah, 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 bringing it over to C#, but not all of it, Frank. Just a little bit. Just a bit. So that's like the thesis of what this is. Taking a little bit of that library that you want to use, bringing it into your .NET application. Is that accurate? What have you found out? Is that wrong? Did I mess it up? Oh my God.
One comment. AKA Nili? NLI? Neely? It needs a slightly better name. NLI. That's what we'll get used to writing because it's in our project files. This is a great thing. We haven't done a low-level .NET talk in forever, so let's do low-level .NET stuff. And how much lower level can you get other than Native Interop, where
True.
It all started. It was where MonoTouch started, was basically binding UI kit to be accessible from C#. Some little tricks to get .NET running, but really all the work was in the binding. Bindings are a lot of work. If I've done a few contributions to the Mac iOS project, the open source project, where you can contribute bindings to the core product. But oftentimes, there's just a library out there that's some native library and you really want to use it. And then you realize, oh gosh, it's kind of a pain in the butt. It's all doable. I have been binding libraries since the olden times. And what I think is really cool is with this new NLI stuff / aka Neely, my life got easier. And I appreciate that. I like it when my life gets easier. So I want to dive in and talk about how they made my life easier. But it's bindings. Let's talk bindings.
It's bindings. And, out of the box, when you're building a .NET MAUI app or a Xamarin app before that, you're right. There were all these native APIs that were available to you. So you had all your Android APIs, all your iOS APIs, UI kit, all that goodness, all the kits, right? And that's because a physical human being, well, actually a bunch of automation, but then a physical human being did a lot of human beings.
It's a lot of human work.
Did a lot of work, one, to get it to be able to call and talk between the two, but also to expose that Objective-C API or Java API in C# and add C# features to it. So there's a lot of tooling, a lot of automation, but a lot of human work that went into it. Now, nowadays, Frank Krueger, not every API is bound when it has been for a while now at this point. It's not it's not a guaranteed 100% thing, but the important ones are usually there for each release that is coming from the iOS and the Android side of things. Did you know that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a little bit sad. I remember when the goal used to be 100% bindings, but the truth is Apple has so many APIs. Have you ever looked at the Accelerate library on iOS? It's, I don't know, 1,000 or 2,000 C functions that maybe like 20 of them are bound, or maybe 30 of them are bound, but it's just thousands and thousands. And because there is a human element involved to make it good, part of this could be automated. But you kind of hit the nail on the head. It's not just talking to Objective-C or talking to C. It's making it nice from a .NET perspective, which means, well, let's not talk about object-oriented APIs and that kind of stuff, but, creating and classes and nice, friendly APIs and events, wild stuff like that.
Nice names.
Do the fancy work. Nice names. Defaults.
Properties, defaults, async await, all this stuff, right? And
especially, sorry, I have to interrupt you. Especially properties, because that's where debugging magic happens. I'm now stuck in a little bit of a Swift world I have to work on for my Vision apps. I have to work on Swift, and I gotta tell you, the debugging experience is terrible. The one glorious thing about working in the Maui.NET space is how good our debuggers are, and put properties on objects, and you get to see so many details in the debugger. They're free. Everyone put 1 million properties on your objects to make your life easier when you're debugging.
That's a good point. Yeah, no, it's out there. And, I think the nice part now is that there's always been binding technology for like the longest time. And the binding technology that was out there, though, which is also what the team used. So when you would go and sell like Google Play services or Android X libraries, those are bindings, or Facebook, they were open source bindings that for all intents and purposes took the entire library, the entire native library, and put an entire wrapper over every single API. It was kind of like all-ish or nothing for the most part. And that gets really complicated when you only need bits and pieces. Now, in modern, when we talk about Native Library Interop, I want to talk about other frameworks do this, because they've done something a little bit different. So like when you're thinking React Native or Flutter, for example, they use a concept of channels. Are you aware of the channel concept?
No, but I can make some guesses, but please explain it, because I don't know.
Okay. I'm not an expert necessarily when it comes to platform specific code, but I call it channels. I think that is the name of it basically. But the whole idea is that you sort of create this sort of two-way back and forth communication system to access the platform code. So you end up creating this method channel that's like, hey, this method exists over here, and this is like the sort of the API definition. You're sort of invoke into a method, right? So literally kind of the Flutter platform example is, hey, you have this, channel that's called, battery. And then, hey, there's a get battery level method that you're going to invoke, and it's going to return an integer. And there's sort of this mapping back and forth that you can call. So you're kind of defining, hey, this thing exists over here. This is what it looks like. Map this channel, and it'll communicate back and forth. So your Dart code can call into Java code, and your Java code can return back information into your Dart code, basically. For all intents and purposes, that's how it works. It kind of reminds me of Cecil a little bit, like the style of writing, if you will. But that's for all intents and purposes there. So if you were a developer, what this means is if you were creating your own Java library or something like that, you would create an API definition that's probably even cleaner than the actual API definition, it'd be more compatible, go back and forth. Or if you're the Flutter developer, you're creating this sort of high-level abstraction where you're invoking back and forth and calling into this library. The nice thing is that you create channels for only things you need. So if Frank, for example, creates the best IoT library in the world in Java, and I only need one method that's called get me, balance the bot.
Do it.
Right.
Yeah. Good.
Right.
Yeah. Great.
So it's only has one goal, which is balance bot. And I don't need go get me a Coke bot, go get me, the Celsius, go cut the grass.
I'm being
bot.
Trolled.
Yes. I just need one method on that bot, which is please balance. I could, for all intents and purposes, just create a channel back and forth to call that method inside the native library. And that is the channel at the high level that I know, right? I'm not an expert in this area, but from my understanding, that is what the goal of it is, which is kind of nice in a way.
Well, to quote John Oliver, cool. Cool. So from the more nerdy programming language standpoint, we call that the foreign function interface. So yeah, you have a programming language, you want to call into some other programming language. It's called the FFI. And it's always fun to see how different languages and different runtimes solve the issue. The web world is very complicated because there is no native interface or anything like that. So you got to make decisions. But other worlds like Python, I think they have a really cool... They do it in a whole different way. They created a whole new language that syntactically looks like Python, but gets compiled into C code to become the bridge between the Python and the native code in this case.
Is that C Python?
Yeah, it's basically what everyone uses except for MicroPython. It's really cool. It's really handy, but it's a whole weird new language you have to learn and know how to use. WebAssembly comes to mind, all those things. .NET, we've always had good old pinvoke. Ever since day one, you've been able to talk to C functions pretty darn easily. Native functions like nothing object-oriented. Global functions. If a library exports a global function, you can interface to it. Now, there was always the trick of where do you put the DLL, or worse, in iOS, how do you link in the library? Oh, my God. And I think that's where this new library really shines, is they help you with that other step. But we're still talking about the binding side. There is that other ugly side of actually referencing the native code. I think I do want to set the stage a little bit and say, there's always been this easy bindings to make and the hard bindings to make. The easy bindings were always the ones where you're just calling functions, big global functions, because pinvoke's been around. It's really easy to create that kind of binding. The hard ones where you were trying to bind a .NET object-oriented API to another separate object-oriented API. That's where things get really complicated. So think C++, that's an object-oriented API. Objective-C, that's a whole different object-oriented API. What were you talking about? Java, that's a whole nother object-oriented API. And there's a million others out there. Python's got one, et cetera, et cetera. That's harder because now you have to talk about who's managing memory. Is it a garbage collected language? Is it a ref counted language? Is it something like Rust where who knows, it's using a mixture of everything? Go is a garbage collected language, I believe. So if you want to interface with that, those kind of interfaces between two object systems, those were always the big, nasty, complicated ones. That's why binding to UIKit, binding to Android APIs has been more complicated than the good old 1990s of just binding to C APIs. That's it. I just want to make it clear that there is that distinction, and it's nasty because the new library is going to help us with that too.
Well, let's talk about the old library first, the old way of doing bindings. And haven't done bindings in a long time, but I'm assuming you've done bindings, you've contributed bindings. What's your experiences with binding or problems to solve with bindings? Like, we know what it does and the outcome is you get to access these native APIs, but what's sort of the ups and downs from your experience of how traditional bindings have been done in the past?
It's changed over time. So I probably won't even be giving the most modern, up-to-date version here. But let's say I do have an object-oriented Objective-C library because that's all I can really bind to easily on iOS. I'm going to talk from the iOS side. I'm so sorry. Everyone knows I'm terrible at Android. I'll let you cover Android, James. So what you do is, first, you try to get the native project compiling on your machine because that's always the first pain point. Hopefully there's an Xcode project, but not always. So you got to create an Xcode project. Now, the next pain point is you can never remember what project settings to use. You got to pick a platform. You're not really sure how to pick a platform. So immediately you start creating a build script to enumerate through the many platforms. Is it iOS, ARM64, iOS simulator, Mac ARM64? You go through all the permutations and you start writing a nasty build script. And then you're like, okay, great. I got a bunch of native libraries. You compile them all into a big fat library. And you're like, time to bind. Because your real goal was just to get all the native code together into a big library. So you did that with a bunch of nasty build scripts. So now you get to go over to the lovely .NET side and you start writing pinvoke code to call into hopefully a simple C API. If it's an object-oriented API, good luck. If it's a UI kit-based API, then there's stuff built into MAUI, Xamarin to help you bind to that kind of stuff. But it's still a bit low level. You really need to read up on how NSObject works and all the constructors you have to overload correctly to make sure you play nice with the ref counting system and all that stuff. Okay, so now you have a .NET project and you have a native project. Now you Google for roughly 3 days to figure out how to get the two to compile together into one happy NuGet file. You upload the NuGet file, and Bob's your uncle, you're all done. That's the binding process in the old days.
Yeah, and I think that some of the things on the Android side is there's like these XML files and these transforms. There's a bunch of stuff. Like, you can just kind of put it in, but then it kind of, the nice thing is Java maps a little bit closer to C#. So you kind of get a nasty API. And then, of course, the Java stuff doesn't really have async stuff. So you got to like prettify that up and do a bunch of stuff. There are a bunch of transforms. There's ways of printing up, and the tooling will kind of help manipulate the data for you. So it's very similar in a way, but there is sort of more of an XML transform that's out there that kind of does it. And on the Android side, I'd say that technology I don't think has really changed. There hasn't been really new tooling or stuff like that on that end, but there was some new tooling on iOS that came along, which I think is Objective-Sharpie, which was a command line tool that has been out there for a while, but the whole idea is you have an Objective-C compatible library, you run it through a command line tool and it'll spit out all the stuff for you, basically.
Yes, plus or minus. There's still a manual process. You have to still in C# code create an interface. It's kind of a holdover of just how Xamarin always worked in the past. You define an interface to say what APIs are public, the ones that you're actually going to expose. And then Objective-Sharpie goes behind your back and generates all the nasty code that you actually don't want to write because you'll never get it right. So let Objective-Sharpie do it. Yeah, that was a good change. I forget how many years ago. It's been a little while, but Objective-Sharpie was a big deal, that coming out, because before you had to write these things by hand, and I made mistakes all the time, I promise.
So it would be nice if we had a better solution for this, and that's where
NLI, Neely.
Neely comes
Native Library Interop comes in. So what is Neely? Neely is two things at a high level. It is a template for a project. So it's a good getting started place if you have this idea that I want to bind to a native library. Honestly, there were tutorials and things, but they were all a little iffy. So it's wonderful to just have a template project. I think it needs to get fully templatized and put into NuGet properly, but right now you just clone a GitHub repo.
Yeah.
At a very high level, that's where you start. You clone this little template, and it's all set up. You can .NET build that puppy, depending on whether you have your workloads installed, and depending on whether you have Objective-Sharpie installed, that may or may not work. Get your prerequisites installed, do your .NET build, and all of a sudden, you're going to have a functioning .NET library that references some native code. Let's ignore for a moment what that native code is, but that's pretty nice, honestly, because I've made so many mistakes setting up these kinds of projects. So just having that template and just having something that builds off the bat is just a good start right there. Shall I continue? Do you have any comments there?
I love it. So far, it sounds good to me. I like templates. Yes. I actually recommended in
real template though. Yeah.
Yeah. In the, I think it would be fascinating to create the template in .NET New, which I think would work. They'd have to pump out the template today, by the way, is multiple things. It is a sample project from .NET MAUI. It is the binding projects,
right?
And it is the native project. So it's kind of right now today 5 projects for iOS, Android, the bindings for iOS, Android, and the .NET MAUI one. That could probably be simplified. What I recommended was, can you put the template in a completely different repo so it's way easier to clone and download? So you don't have to download all the stuff, basically. And you could use, ideally, GitHub templates to, you know what I mean? Make your own.
Either one. I think it can be put into .NET New. People abuse .NET New all the time. It's okay if it creates a whole solution and everything. It's
just files. It's just files. It's just files on disk. I get it. It's true. Yeah.
Anyway, so it's great to just have that template. If you crack that template open, what you'll see are, well, the standard split that we have, Android and Mac iOS folders. Suspiciously, no Windows folder. You need to find someone who works at Microsoft and figure out why there's no Windows folder there.
Well, you don't need a Windows folder, Frank, because you can just consume Windows stuff. What do you just C#, C++ stuff?
Yeah, exactly. Come on, there's stuff out there. There's Ole, COM. What if I want to bind to a COM object and stuff like that?
Okay.
I'm just saying that there is room for some Windows code. Okay. What if it's just C APIs? Like I just want to build a C project.
That's true. That's true. All right.
Just saying, there could be
now. Here's the thing, though. It wouldn't just be a Windows thing, because you can actually interop with C and C++ for iOS and Android and Mac as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But I have an actual use case for this thing. I want to use this matrix library out there, which is just C code. It doesn't actually use any of the platform features. So I can bring it into every platform. It is cross-platform. It's cross-platform C code. But I still don't want to do all the binding projects. They're gross and hard. It'd be nice to just have Windows also compile the code and just work. All that good stuff.
It's a good thing it's good. It's open source. Leave an issue, Frank. Leave an issue. Okay, go ahead. Proceed.
Enough of my feature list. Let's talk about what it actually does. So if you crack open the actual .NET project file, you'll notice 2 important things. There's the API definitions. This is the iOS side. And this is your standard Objective Sharpie thing where you declare your public API for the classes you want to do. This is standard fare if you've ever created a binding before, but if you've never created a binding, it can be a little bit weird. But basically, you're just declaring an interface for your public API. The magic tools in the background will turn them into real objects and real classes. Don't worry about it. You're just declaring an API. So that's easy. So you see that on the .NET side. If you open the native project, you see something really cool. We've been talking about Objective-C this whole time, but you don't see Objective-C. You see Swift.
Whoa, look out.
Swift. Yeah. Well, the truth is they're doing a little trick. But first I want to say that's great. It's great that it supports a Swift project because all modern iOS and Mac code is getting written in Swift these days.
Yeah.
So chances are you're going to be wanting to interop with a Swift library, not with an Objective-C library. Does anyone write Objective-C libraries anymore? No, I don't think they do, really.
I don't think so. No.
So that's a huge plus. I have literally never bound to a Swift library ever because I did not know how to set up the project correctly to make that. I knew what it could happen. It's just code in the end, but I did not know the build settings to make that thing work. So that was super cool to see. I'm not done yet, but do you have any comments on the Swift?
No, this makes sense to me. And you said there's so in that instance, if there was an Objective-C library, you wouldn't bind directly to the library. You would create sort of an API on top of the library, potentially.
Yeah. On the iOS side, you usually want to expose either basic C functions, global C functions, or you want to expose Objective-C classes. The reason you want to do that is because all the binding tools, Objective Sharpie and everything, are set up to know that how to interop with that object system correctly and nicely with, battle tested. We've been using this thing for years. We know how to bind to Objective-C correctly.
Got it.
So that's actually the fun little trick. You know what they don't know how to bind to correctly is Swift.
Yeah.
So, but there is a fancy dancy little trick you can do in Swift. You can, if you have a Swift class, you can put little attributes on it and say, make this class Objective-C compatible. And when you do that, all of a sudden, Objective Sharpie starts working because a bridging library for Objective-C is generated, which contains all the information and the API stubs that Objective Sharpie needs to know to bind a .NET library to Objective-C/Swift. So it's Swift code, but it's presenting an Objective-C interface.
That makes sense. Cool. So, for example, in your super cool IoT library, that's all maybe a mixture of Swift and Objective-C compatible Swift, or maybe it's no Objective-C compatible, it's just Swift. I couldn't just call Objective Sharpie on your library. I would import your library into my own Swift library and create an API definition on top of it that Objective Sharpie would then be casting into C#. Is that an accurate representation?
Yeah, you nailed it. So, let's say you created a Swift library out there.
Whoa,
it's published on Swift PM. I have no idea what happened. You got drunk one night. I think that's what happened.
Love it.
And now I, as a good .NET developer, want to bind to it. I would not just download your project and try to start compiling it or something. I would use the template from Neely here, and I would add your project as a reference to my project. So therefore, and then in my code, I would write a nice, beautiful, guaranteed .NET compatible API to interface with whatever madness you created while you were drunk.
Nice. Now, is there any limitation for that Objective-C thing, or is just Swift always one-to-one compatible with Objective-C?
It's pretty compatible for classes. Now, those aren't the only kinds of objects you can have in Swift. You also have protocols, which are like interfaces. You also have actors, which are classes, but with more restraints and things like that.
But I'm defining the methods and the classes, so I get to define compatibility. Yeah, it makes sense.
Exactly. So, but also no generics. Generics aren't supported because Objective-C doesn't. This is still just binding to Objective-C in the end. So Objective-C doesn't have generics, therefore the binding doesn't have generics. More limitations. That's about it. You're going to need some high level global functions at some point to just start calling into the graph. It's kind of a chicken and egg issue. You're like, I need an object, so you're kind of back to the Java factory pattern. You're like, have a global function, create factory objects, and then you can start calling into the API, and just try to do your best to make that nice and C#/F# friendly.
Nice. Okay, then what? So now I got this binding.
And then you're done. That's the beauty here. Because you use the template, they're doing the big, important, nasty step of, A, creating the project and getting the configuration correct, but B, also compiling the Xcode project. So where I said, 20 minutes ago, I had all these nasty build scripts doing the full permutation of every operating system and every chipset or processor that architecture could use.
Ugh.
I would write that out every library you can go see on my GitHub. Every native library I have has an ugly script that does that. And I would forget some all the time. But no more, because thanks to NLI, it just compiles the Xcode project correctly and does all the bindings correctly. And then you just pop this thing on NuGet and you are truly done. Thank goodness for this.
And then you have a library that you're just consuming. Now, in this case, right, ideally, if it was an iOS and Android library, you as a developer might not only create the binding, then maybe create a nice little wrapper on top of the iOS and the Android. If there was an iOS and Android library, for example, kind of like my plugin, then you kind of create a plugin for the library. if you wanted to. Yeah. Else you would conditionally compile the code, basically.
Yeah. But since I'm generally writing like Objective-C / Swift, Swift Objective-C classes as my public API, I just try to make that good.
Yeah.
So that the Objective Sharpie version of it comes out half decent. I think it puts partial on the classes, so you can use partial and you can just fill it out in more detail with your own code. But in general, I just try to make the interface objects themselves very .NET compatible, properties and good names.
So this kind of now opens up the world where, hey, there's this cool library, this cool UI element, blah, blah, blah. I can suck it in, create this for it. But you kind of craft some API that's, hey, like, this library creates 18 different charts, but I need one of the charts. So let me just kind of create this little native library interop binding just for that one chart specifically, basically.
Yeah, okay, so there's that, because you can choose the binding, but let me tell you what it really is. It takes so much mental effort and all the efforts kind of things to get those build scripts and projects all set up and getting everything working to where the sample project can actually link with it correctly and where it can actually function, that by the time you get that part working, you're just like, you're so exhausted that you just do the simplest API. You're just like, one-to-one API, good enough. I need to move on with my life. Now that, and that was a big hurdle in the beginning. Like, there are libraries out there that I've wanted to use, but I'm like, I don't want to go through the trouble of creating that binding. So what they've done is just remove that first hurdle. So it has two big effects. One, I'll be more tempted to just bind a C library. If I just see a library out there that I want, I'll just go grab it, and because I know creating a binding project for it's easier now. But two, because I won't have wasted all that mental effort on just getting the stupid thing building, I can actually spend time making the API interface to it half decent and of good quality and do all the tricks that you're mentioning. Because, you didn't have to suffer through the build part.
Yeah. And the one nice thing here, too, is I want to point this out, is actually in the default template, you're not even binding a third-party library. You're actually just binding, and like the default template, you pass it a string, it returns a concatenated string from Swift or from Java. So what that really means is, you can create like you can do whatever you want. So for example, let's say there is a library. This actually is kind of to your point, Frank, is let's say there is a native iOS 18 library that's not bound. Well, traditionally, you'd probably want to go through the process of doing the whole binding and contributing it and getting into a release. But now if you just have one API, you could create this native library interop to just call into that specific API that you want.
And I will say they've done a great job making the template pretty small, but it's about as small as it can be, and yet still has a lot of files because there's just a lot here. You have to declare the .NET API, you have to have the native code, you have to have the configurations for both of those. And so I do want to mention, you can be a terrible person and be like how I'm actually going to use this thing and bind like 3 or 4 different native libraries all at once in one binding project, because I'm controlling the API that I expose. So I'll just expose the bits and pieces I want. So import 4 different native libraries that I want, but only expose the little bits and pieces that I actually need.
It makes total sense, because it's like, for you who's not looking to Nugatize it and cast it with the world, you're like, hey, what do I need for my app? And just suck it in and just go to town there. Totally makes sense in general. I like that. In fact, that's pretty fascinating.
That's why I want the Windows version. Yeah, that's why I want it to just be fully cross-platform. Yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, because
dump my native code in there. Yeah.
You could see a world where there could even be an option for .NET MAUI project and also configure all the binding libraries, which is basically the full template with the sample project. Not bad. That'd be kind of cool. because there are a lot of developers that maybe want to go down this extra route. Now, on top of that, I'd be super interested in a Maui app. There's like all the different platform folders. If you could bundle some stuff in there. Like,
right.
Yeah. Possibilities are endless is what I'm saying. Right.
Yeah. Well, feature requests, right? They give you an inch, you want a mile or something like that. But I think they gave us more than an inch. Like I said, it's two big things. They removed a big hurdle for just creating these projects, and now they're going to let me spend more time futzing with the APIs / just having whatever my app is, native additional project in all the folders where I can just dump native code.
Well, everyone should go give it a look. If you ever created a binding, let us know. Go to youtube.com/@mergeconflict.fm. You can find us on the YouTubes. Leave a comment on the show. We'd super appreciate it. We love reading those. And let us know if you created a binding, if you tried this out, if you read the blog. I'll put links in the show notes on the podcast and on the YouTube as well. We got a nice little YouTube community going on. We got like 600 going on over there. It's happening. Let me see. What do we got? Let me go into the comments. We got any comments? We have 573 subscribers. Oh, wow. And people are reading stuff. Holy, people are watching stuff. It's our channel birthday today. Wow. Congratulations.
Oh, happy birthday, James.
Happy birthday. We did it. Oh, wow. Cool. Oh, my gosh. People seem to be very upset at Apple from last week's podcast and the Apple tax. That's cool.
Yeah. There's always that.
Let's see. Dave said, because we were talking about .NET MAUI and the using Xamarin in 2025, Dave was saying, how do we get rid of the banner in Visual Studio saying Xamarin's out of support?
Oh.
So you're not allowed to. If you have a Xamarin project, it's there forever. They really want you to know. Let's see. Max from 2 episodes ago says Google just changed the name of the TV thing, and that's about it. So yeah, that's about right. So yeah. We love reading comments, positive or negative. We love it. Thanks for tuning in to the pod. We appreciate it. We're getting closer. We're getting closer to making money again on the pod. Let's see where we're at. Let's see where we're at on the thing. We got all the subscribers we need. We are halfway to the public watch hours, so that's pretty cool. Okay. We need 3,000, and we're at 1,500. Now, some people may say, well,
make sure to watch as you fall asleep.
Watch as you fall asleep. Some people say, wow, you got, how many views we got on the YouTubes? Let's do a little YouTube update, lifetime. We got 11,000 views. Pretty good. Not bad. Of the podcast, are you ready for the podcast number update, like analytics, statistics? You ready?
I think we do much better as a podcast than as a show. But I don't know how to predict numbers. I'm bad at numbers, turns out.
I like to think that we have a pretty big podcast because on Fireside, when I click on our podcast, it like takes a while to load, which I think is good and bad. We have 2.6 million downloads, so that's pretty
amazing. Good. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Granted, our YouTube's only been around for a year, and we've grown substantially, which is great. We appreciate all of you. If you are listening, you want to see our faces, check us out on the YouTube, youtube.com/@mergeconflict.fm. But that's going to do for this week's podcast. Until next time, James Magno.
And I'm Frank Kruger. Thanks for watching and listening.
Peace.